She just wanted to fix the roof before the next storm. But when she hired a starving native man, she had no idea what was about to happen. What he did next shocked the entire neighborhood and unlocked a secret from the past. Watch this story. Until the end, you'll be surprised. If you enjoy love and romance stories, subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The suffocating heat of the Arizona desert seemed to suck the life from everything it touched. Sarah dragged her bare feet across the red, parched earth, each step an agony that echoed in the silent vastness of Monument Valley. Her cracked lips could no longer form words, but her eyes still carried the fire of someone who had chosen to die trying rather than live as property. 6 months. 6 months since her own parents had sold her like cattle to Richard Thornton, a wealthy rancher from Phoenix who collected women like trophies. The excuse had been her supposed infertility, discovered at 23 after tests she never asked to take. A woman who can't bear children is useless to an honorable family, her father had said, counting the dirty bills he received in exchange for his daughter. Richard kept her on his ranch like a broken doll, locked in a luxurious room. That was her golden prison. He confused possession with love, pain with passion. His hands were cold as metal, his touches sharp as razors. He had papers that legally made her his property, a filthy contract she had signed under threats against the family who had abandoned her. "You are mine," he repeated every night, and each word was like a bullet to her chest. "Even your bones belong to me." But that dawn, when blood ran down her thighs after another night of violence disguised as conjugal rights, something broke inside Sarah. It wasn't just her body bleeding, but her soul refusing to die silently. She broke the window with her bare fists, cut herself on the sharp edges of glass, and jumped from the second floor. The pain of the fall was like a kiss compared to the agony of living caged. She ran through the dawn, barefoot, wearing only a torn nightgown stuck to her body by sweat and blood. She ran until her legs gave out, until the sun rose and began to devour her fair city dweller's skin. Monument Valley stretched infinitely before her, with its stone walls and thick vegetation that promised both refuge and death. When her strength completely abandoned her, she collapsed among rocks and bushes, her body trembling with fever and dehydration. It was there in that moment between life and death that she heard footsteps. Daniel Begay observed the fallen woman a few meters away. His black eyes, sculpted by 40 years of struggle and mourning, scanned her wounded body with a mixture of caution and something he couldn't name. He knew that type of wound, not those of the body but of the soul bleeding through the skin. A leader of one of the last Navajo communities that resisted in the region, Daniel carried on his shoulders not only the weight of his own pain, but that of an entire people. Widowed for 3 years, father of 3 children, he lived between the echoes of Emma, his wife who died of cancer, and the fear of allowing his heart to desire again. The woman before him was clearly foreign to the desert, to his culture, to his world. Skin too fair, hands too soft, even wounded and dirty. Everything about her screamed danger for his community, which had already suffered enough from the invasion of the white man. But there was something in her half-closed eyes, a strength that pulsed even at the brink of death that made him hesitate. Daniel knelt beside her, his calloused fingers gently touching her wrist. Her heart beat weakly but determined, like a war drum that refuses to be silenced. "Why are you here?" he whispered in Navajo, knowing she wouldn't understand, but needing to ask the spirits that governed that land. Sarah slowly opened her eyes. The face she saw above hers was like a sculpture made by time and suffering. Lines marked by the sun, scars that told stories, eyes deep as ancient wells. Black, long hair framed a face that could have come from the rock paintings of the first inhabitants of America. "Please," was all she managed to whisper, and in that single word was all the weight of her escape, her pain, her refusal to die as she had lived, on her knees. Daniel knew he was breaking unwritten rules by carrying her in his arms. He knew the elders of the tribe would not look kindly on a stranger being brought to the heart of their community, but there was something in the way she surrendered to his care without losing her dignity. something in the silent strength that emanated from her broken body that touched a part of him he thought was dead. The Navajo settlement was hidden in a clearing protected by natural rock formations, about a 2-hour walk into the desert. 23 families lived there, resisting as best they could the constant pressure from ranchers, miners, and real estate speculators. It was a world apart, where time ran differently and ancestral traditions still governed daily life. When Daniel appeared carrying the unconscious woman, a tense silence took over the settlement. Women stopped preparing food, men set down their tools, children hid behind their mothers. Everyone knew the stories of what the white man had done to their people over the centuries. "Have you lost your mind, Daniel?" The harsh voice of Grace, the most respected elder in the tribe, cut the air like an axe. "Brought a Bilagana into the midst of our children?" Bilagana, foreigner. The word carried centuries of mistrust and pain. "She's dying, Grandmother Grace," Daniel replied, using the respectful term to address the elder. "How can I let someone die when I can save them?" "And how can you put our children at risk for a stranger?" she retorted, her small bright eyes fixed on Sarah's unconscious face. "She could bring diseases, pursuers, problems we can't imagine." But it was at that moment that Jason, Daniel's youngest son, only 8 years old, timidly approached. The boy had inherited his father's curiosity and his dead mother's stubbornness. "Dad, she's bleeding," he said softly, pointing to the wound staining Sarah's nightgown. "Yes, little one," Daniel replied, carrying her toward his hogan. "That's why we're going to take care of her." Daniel's home was larger than the others, not for status but out of necessity. As a leader, he often received visitors from other tribes, mediated conflicts, kept sacred objects. It was built traditionally with wood, straw, and clay, but had personal touches that spoke of his history. Metal tools acquired in trade with nearby towns, books in English he had learned to read to better protect his people, photographs of his dead wife in simple frames. He laid Sarah in a hammock in the most private corner of the house, where she would be protected but not completely isolated. For 3 days and 3 nights, she was between life and death, feverish, delirious in a mixture of English and words that seemed to come from nightmares. Daniel didn't leave her side. He prepared teas with medicinal herbs he had learned from. The elders washed her wounds with clean water and infinite patience, dripped liquids between her parched lips. His 3 children, Jason, 8 years old, Lily, 12, and Michael, 15, took turns observing the stranger, with a mixture of curiosity and fear. It was Lily who first noticed the fever had broken in the early morning of the 4th day. "Dad," she opened her eyes, whispered the girl, gently shaking the shoulder of her father, who had dozed off sitting in a chair next to the hammock. Sarah was conscious, observing everything around her with eyes still weak but alert. The interior of the hogan was completely different from anything she knew. Walls of wood and clay, the smell of herbs and smoke, objects that told stories of a world she only knew through distorted school books. "Where am I?" she asked in a hoarse voice. "Safe," was Daniel's simple answer. "What's your name?" "Sarah." She tried to sit up, but her body was still too weak. "Why did you help me?" The question caught Daniel by surprise. In his culture, helping those in need was not a choice but a spiritual obligation, but he realized that in her world, things might work differently. "Because you were dying," he replied, as if it were obvious. Sarah studied him in silence. There was a quiet strength in this man that disconcerted her. He didn't ask questions about her life, didn't demand explanations, didn't show expectations. He simply existed, solid as the centuries-old trees that surrounded the settlement. In the days that followed, as she slowly recovered, Sarah observed the life of the Navajo community. It was a completely new world for her, who had grown up in the outskirts of Mesa before being sold as property. Here decisions were made collectively, tasks divided according to the needs and abilities of each person, children raised by the entire community. But she also felt the distrustful looks of many residents. She heard whispers in Navajo that she didn't understand, noticed conversations that stopped when she approached. She knew her presence was causing division in the place that had taken her in. It was during one of those afternoons of silent observation that the accident happened. Jason, Daniel's youngest son, was playing near the stream that cut through the settlement when he stepped on a rattlesnake resting among the rocks. The boy's scream echoed through the community like thunder. Sarah didn't think. Her still aching body reacted on instinct, running to where Jason had fallen, his leg already rapidly swelling. Daniel arrived seconds later, despair stamped on his face as he saw his son writhing in pain. "Rattlesnake," said Sarah quickly, examining the bite. "I need some things. Quick." "You understand venom?" asked Daniel, his voice tense. "My grandmother was a healer. She taught me before she died." Sarah was already thinking about the herbs she would need. "I need yarrow, plantain, and if you have burned horn powder." "We have all that," said a voice behind them. It was Grace, the elder, who had initially opposed Sarah's presence. "Lily, go get what she asked for. Hurry." During the following hours, Sarah worked with the precision of someone who knew a life depended on her knowledge. She prepared poultices, teas, ointments. Her hands, which trembled with weakness days before, now moved with absolute certainty. She knew exactly what to do because she had learned from someone who really understood, a poor black woman who healed, because love for the community was greater than any fear. Daniel observed her every movement, impressed not only with her knowledge, but with the way she completely devoted herself to the task of saving his son. There was no hesitation, fear, or bargaining, just an iron determination to fight against death. Jason spent the night between life and death, but by dawn the fever broke, the swelling decreased, and he managed to drink some water. He was saved. The news spread through the settlement like wildfire. The Bilagana had saved the leader's son. She had used knowledge that many of the elders also possessed, but applied it with a mastery that few had. Suddenly, the distrustful looks began to carry curiosity as well and, in some cases, respect. "How does a city woman know the remedies of the desert?" asked Grace that night, when they gathered around the central fire to celebrate Jason's recovery. Sarah, still weak but steady, looked into the elder's eyes. "My grandmother was the daughter of a slave. She learned from the women in the slave quarters, who learned from native women, who learned from their grandmothers. Knowledge has no color, Grandmother Grace. It only has necessity." It was the first time Sarah had called the elder grandmother, using the same respectful term everyone in the tribe used, and it was the first time Grace smiled at her. From that night on, everything changed. Sarah began to be sought out by the women of the settlement who wanted to learn her recipes or who came to share their own. She discovered that her grandmother's knowledge had deep roots that connected with the ancestral wisdom of these people. She began to help with daily chores, slowly adapting to the rhythm of the community. She learned to prepare flatbread, to weave baskets with natural fibers, to identify native medicinal plants. Her hands, accustomed only to urban chores, developed new calluses, more honorable ones. Daniel observed this transformation with a mixture of admiration and unease. Admiration for the strength of this woman who had arrived nearly dead and now flourished like a plant that had finally found its soil. Unease because he realized that something inside him was also changing. He began to look for excuses to talk to her. He asked about the herbs she collected, sought advice for his children's minor injuries, offered to accompany her when she walked through the desert in search of medicinal plants. Each conversation was a small revelation. Sarah spoke little about her past, but Daniel could read between the lines the pain she carried. He saw in the scars on her wrists the story of a desperate escape. He noticed how she flinched when someone touched her unexpectedly, how she avoided talking about family, how her eyes got lost in moments of silence. One night, as she helped him prepare a tea for Jason, who had a low fever, Daniel asked a question he had been swallowing for weeks. "Will someone come looking for you?" Sarah's hand stopped mid-movement. She remained silent for a few seconds, stirring the herbs in the hot water. "Maybe," she finally replied. "He has money. He has lawyers. He has papers that say I belong to him." "Papers don't make a person belong to another," Daniel said firmly. "In the world I come from, they do. Her voice was low, but carried a bitterness that cut like a knife. "My own parents sold me because they say I'm incomplete, that I'm not fit to bear children." Daniel observed her in silence. He saw the pain she tried to hide, the shame she carried for something she had no control over. In his culture, a woman was respected regardless of her ability to bear children. A person's value was not measured by their fertility, but by their contribution to the community. "You are not incomplete," he said, his deep voice cutting through the silence of the night. "You are complete just as you are." Sarah raised her eyes to him, surprised by the firmness of that statement. No one had ever said that to her. Throughout her life, since adolescence, her identity had been defined by absence, the absence of children, of purpose, of value. In that moment, something broke between them. An invisible barrier that both had kept erect silently crumbled. Their gazes lingered longer than necessary, loaded with a tension that neither knew how to name. Daniel stood up abruptly, as if he had touched a hot coal. "The tea is ready," he said, avoiding looking directly at her. "I'll take it to Jason." But when he passed by her to get the gourd, their shoulders briefly touched. It was a quick, accidental touch, but it burned like fire on both their skins. Sarah was left alone, in the kitchen, her heart beating in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't the fear she knew so well, nor the resignation she had learned to carry. It was something new, dangerous, that frightened and attracted her at the same time. In the days that followed, a subtle but constant tension developed between them. Conversations that ended abruptly, glances that crossed and quickly looked away, a new awareness of each other's presence that made the air denser. Daniel tried to resist what he felt, trapped by the ghosts of Emma, his dead wife. He had promised before the sacred fire that he would love her forever, that no other woman would occupy her place in his heart. But Sarah wasn't trying to take Emma's place. She was creating her own space, unique, that he didn't know how to define. Sarah, in turn, fought against the fear of allowing someone to get too close. Her experience with Richard had left deep wounds in her ability to trust, to surrender, to believe that a man could touch her without trying to dominate her. But there was something about Daniel that was completely different from anything she knew. He asked permission with his eyes before approaching. He respected her silences. He never demanded explanations or demonstrations of gratitude. He simply existed beside her, solid and reliable as the earth beneath her feet. The situation reached its limit one afternoon when Sarah went to collect herbs alone and got lost in the desert. When Daniel realized she hadn't returned by nightfall, he organized a desperate search. He found her hours later sitting on a rock by the edge of a waterfall, crying. "Are you hurt?" was the first thing he asked, quickly examining her for injuries. "No," she replied, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I just remembered who I was before coming here." Daniel sat down beside her on the rock, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough for her to know she wasn't alone. "And who were you?" "Nobody." Her voice was a whisper. "A daughter who wasn't good enough, a wife who wasn't useful, a broken woman who can't even get lost properly in the desert." "You are not nobody," Daniel said firmly. "You are the woman who saved my son, who teaches our children about plants that heal, who brings new knowledge to our community, who has the hands of a healer and the heart of a warrior." Sarah looked at him, surprised by the passion in his voice. "You don't really know me," she said. "If you knew why I ran away, what they did to me—" "I know enough," he interrupted. "I know you chose to die trying rather than live on your knees. That tells me everything about who you are." In that moment, with the sound of the waterfall covering their words and the moon beginning to rise, Daniel extended his hand to touch Sarah's face, but he stopped midway, waiting for a permission she gave with an almost imperceptible nod. His fingers touched her face with a gentleness she had forgotten existed. It wasn't possession. It wasn't entitlement. It was request. It was offering. It was a question asked in the language of touch. "Daniel?" She whispered his name like a prayer. "Sarah," he responded, and in the way he said her name were years of solitude being broken. The first kiss was slow, careful, as if both were dealing with something sacred and fragile. There was no rush, no demand. It was a meeting of two people who had learned to distrust intimacy, but who decided to try once more. When they separated, they stayed with their foreheads touching, breathing the same air, sharing the same space, without either trying to take more than was being offered. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Neither do I," he replied. "It's been a long time since I remember what it's like to not be alone. What if I can't be what you need?" Her voice carried all the fear of a lifetime of rejections. "You already are," he said simply. "You are already everything I didn't know. I needed." They returned to the settlement in silence, but something fundamental had changed between them. It was as if they had signed a contract without words, made a promise without witnesses. The air between them vibrated with a new tension, made of desire and tenderness, fear and hope. That night, Sarah lay in the hammock that Daniel had hung for her in the corner of his hogan, listening to his and his children's breathing in the dark. For the first time in months, she felt truly safe. Not just physically, protected, but emotionally embraced. Daniel, lying in his own hammock, fought against the impulse to cross the space that separated them. His body asked for more, much more, but his mind was still processing the enormity of what had happened that afternoon. He had kissed another woman. He had felt his heart race for someone who wasn't Emma. Guilt and desire mixed in his chest like a confused storm. Part of him felt he was betraying the memory of his dead wife. Another part, deeper, whispered that Emma had always wanted him, to be happy, to find love again if she left first. In the days that followed, they developed a subtle dance of approach and retreat. Moments of intimacy followed by periods of respectful distance. Long conversations under the stars, followed by mornings when they barely spoke, as if they needed to process each new step in this connection growing between them. The community began to notice. There was nothing explicit, but those who had known Daniel for decades perceived subtle changes. He smiled more. He spent more time talking with Sarah when she helped care for injuries or prepare remedies. His eyes sought her out during collective work, in the moments of gathering around the fire. Grace, with the wisdom of someone who had lived much and observed even more, was the first to speak about the subject. "Mourning has its time," she said to Daniel one afternoon as he helped her prepare seeds for planting. "But those who truly love want the beloved to be happy, even after they're gone." Daniel stopped husking corn and looked at the elder. "It's not that simple, Grandmother Grace." "Love is never simple," she agreed, "but it doesn't have to be a prison either. Emma left happy because she knew you would love her forever. That doesn't change if you decide to love someone else too. And if the community doesn't accept her, Sarah already faces resistance for being different from us. The community will accept what's best for the community," Grace said firmly. "And a woman who saves our children, who brings new knowledge, who works hard and respects our traditions, is good for the community, regardless of where she was born." That conversation planted a seed in Daniel's mind. For the first time since Sarah had arrived, he began to seriously consider the possibility of a future together. Not just stolen moments of intimacy, but a life built side by side. Sarah, for her part, faced her own demons. Every time she allowed herself to feel something for Daniel, a voice in her mind whispered that she didn't deserve happiness, that she was destined to be discarded, that her infertility made her a temporary companion at best. It was during one of the long walks they took together through the desert, collecting medicinal plants, that she decided to be completely honest with him about her past. "I need you to know something," she said, stopping in a clearing where giant ferns grew. "About why I ran away." Daniel stopped too, sensing from the tension in her voice that this was important. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," he said. "I need to," she insisted. If this between us is going to continue, you need to know who you're dealing with." And then, for the first time since she had arrived at the settlement, Sarah told her complete story. She told about the parents who sold her, about Richard and his methods of control, about the nights of terror disguised as marriage, about the golden prison where she was kept as a broken trophy. She spoke of the humiliations, the violence, the way he made her feel that her existence was a favor he granted. She told about the forced medical exams, the attempts to get pregnant that were more torture than intimacy, the sentence of infertility that had become her identity. Daniel listened to everything in silence, his jaw becoming tenser with each revelation, his fists involuntarily closing with each description of the cruelty she had suffered. When she finished, both remained silent for long minutes. Sarah waited for judgment, rejection, confirmation that she was merchandise too damaged to be desired. "Where is he now?" was the first thing Daniel asked, his voice controlled but carrying a cold anger. "I don't know. I escaped almost 2 months ago. He must be looking for me." "And if he finds you?" Sarah felt a shiver down her spine. It was a possibility she tried not to consider, but that haunted her in the sleepless early mornings. "He has documents, he has money, he has lawyers. In the white man's law, I still belong to him. In our law, no one belongs to anyone," Daniel said firmly. "And you are under our protection now." The way he said "our" made Sarah's heart race. It wasn't just him speaking, it was the entire community. She had been accepted not just as a guest, but as a member. "Daniel," she began, but he interrupted her by coming closer. "Nothing you've told me changes what I feel for you," he said, his hands framing her face. "You are not defined by the cruelties you suffered. You are defined by the strength you had to escape, by the courage to start over, by the generosity with which you treat our children. And if I can never give, you children?" The question came out as a broken whisper. "I already have 3 children," he replied, "and you already care for them as if they were yours. Family isn't just blood, Sarah. It's choice, it's love, it's daily construction." In that moment, all the walls Sarah had built around her heart crumbled at once. She threw herself into his arms, crying with relief, with fear, with gratitude so deep it couldn't fit into words. Daniel held her against his chest, feeling the weight of the trust she was placing in him. He knew this woman had been broken in ways he couldn't even fully imagine. He knew healing her would be the work of years, perhaps a lifetime. He knew choosing to love her also meant choosing to face the consequences of her past. But looking at her, seeing the strength that pulsed beneath all that pain, he knew it was a choice he would make 1,000 times. "We'll face all of this together," he promised, kissing the top of her head. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." It was too big a promise for that moment, but they both needed it. They needed to believe that the love that was being born between them would be strong enough to resist the storms that would certainly come. Because in their hearts, both knew that the peace of those days wouldn't last forever. Sarah carried a past that wouldn't easily leave her in peace, and Daniel was falling in love with a woman the world considered another man's property. The storm was forming on the horizon, but in that moment, embraced in the desert's secret clearing, they chose to believe that love would be stronger than any tornado that tried to destroy them. The weeks that followed that afternoon at the waterfall were like living in a waking dream. Sarah allowed herself to feel something she had forgotten existed, the possibility of being happy. Each morning was a new discovery, each night a silent promise that perhaps, finally, she had found her place in the world. Daniel had become more present, more protective, without being suffocating. It was a delicate dance they were both learning. How to get close without hurting each other, how to trust without exposing themselves too much, how to love without getting lost. He taught her words in Navajo during their walks through the desert, and she shared stories of her healer grandmother that had shaped her knowledge of plants. "Ayo aninishni," he whispered one of those mornings, as he helped carry the baskets of herbs she had collected. "What does that mean?" asked Sarah, stopping to look at him. "I love you," he translated, and the simplicity of those words carried the weight of a lifetime of meaning. The admission hung in the air between them like a fragile butterfly. Sarah felt her heart race, a mixture of joy and terror running through her veins. It was the first time someone had spoken of love to her without it being a disguised threat, without it being accompanied by possession or control. "Ayo aninishni," she repeated, testing the sounds in the language, trying to absorb all the beauty of that declaration made in his ancestral language. Daniel smiled, a rare and complete smile that transformed his entire face. In that moment, he wasn't just the leader responsible for 23 families, the widower haunted by loss, the father worried about his children's future. He was simply a man in love, rediscovering the joy of sharing life with someone. But happiness, Sarah had learned in the cruelest way, always came with an expiration date. The first sign that the storm was approaching came through Michael, Daniel's oldest son. The 15-year-old teenager came running to the settlement on a suffocatingly hot afternoon, his eyes wide with fear and adrenaline. "Dad, there are strange men in town," he gasped, stopping in front of the hogan where Daniel was fixing a fishing net. "They're asking questions about a woman, showing a photo." Sarah's blood froze in her veins. She was a few meters away, helping Lily prepare cornmeal, when she heard the boy's words. Her hands began to tremble involuntarily, dropping the flour she was holding. "What kind of men?" Daniel's voice was controlled, but Sarah knew him well enough to notice the tension spreading through his muscles. "Men in suits, with expensive cars." One of them had a scar on his face and talked like important people. They offered money to anyone who had information about a woman who ran away from home. Daniel looked directly at Sarah. She was as pale as paper, her trembling hands trying to clean up the flour she had spilled on the ground. It was like watching a person disintegrate in real time. "How did they know I'm here?" she whispered, more to herself than to anyone. "Else? Maybe they don't know," said Daniel, approaching her. They could be looking in several places, but they both knew these were just empty words. Somehow, Richard had tracked her escape to this region, and if he had gotten this far, it was only a matter of time until he discovered exactly where she was. Grace, who had silently approached during the conversation, observed the scene with her small, penetrating eyes. "How many were there?" she asked her grandson. "3 that I saw, but there could be more. They didn't seem like the type who travel alone." The elder nodded gravely. In her 80 years of life, she had seen enough to know when a storm was forming. "I need to leave," Sarah suddenly said, getting up with abrupt movements. "I need to get out of here before they discover where I am. I can't put you in danger because of me." "You're not going anywhere," Daniel's voice cut the air like an axe. "You're not running away again." "You don't understand," she was beginning. To panic, her breathing becoming faster. "You don't know, Richard. He won't simply accept a no. He'll destroy everything he needs to in order to get me back. He'll use the law. He'll use money. He'll use violence if necessary." "And you think we'll let that happen?" Daniel's voice carried a firmness she had never heard before. "You're part of this community now. You're part of my family. No one is going to take you from here against your will." "He has documents, Daniel. Papers that say I'm his wife. In the white man's law, I am his property." "Then we'll change that," Grace said unexpectedly. Everyone turned to look at the elder, surprised by the determination in her voice. "If the white man's law says you belong to him, we'll make the law recognize that you belong to someone else." "How?" asked Sarah, confused. "By marrying Daniel. According to American laws, a married woman cannot be forced to return to a previous marriage if she can prove it was a forced arrangement." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah looked at Daniel, searching in his eyes for some sign that his grandmother's idea was absurd, unthinkable. But what she saw there was serious consideration, as if he were already calculating the possibilities. "It would be just on paper," she said quickly. "Just to legally protect me. It wouldn't need to mean anything more." Daniel's expression hardened. "It wouldn't be just on paper," he replied firmly. "If we're going to do this, it will be real, for all the right reasons." Sarah's heart raced. It was all too fast, too intense. She had arrived there 2 months ago, nearly dead, and now she was considering marrying a man she barely knew, but who had become the center of her reconstructed world. "Daniel, are you sure?" Her voice was a whisper. "Once we do this, there's no going back. Richard won't give up easily. He could make your lives hell." "Let him try," he replied, approaching and holding her hands in his. "I'm not a city man who solves problems with papers and money. I know how to defend myself. I know how to defend my own. And you are mine now." The possessive way he said those last words should have frightened her. considering her past. But there was a fundamental difference between Richard's sick possession and Daniel's fierce protection. Richard wanted to possess to control. Daniel wanted to protect to liberate. "We need to act fast," Grace said pragmatically. "If these men are in the region, it's a matter of days until they get here. Michael, do you know the lawyer in town who helped with the land demarcation?" "Mr. Thompson." "Yes. Go to him, explain the situation. Ask him to prepare the marriage papers for tomorrow. Say it's urgent, that we're willing to pay well." "Grandmother Grace," interrupted Sarah, "you don't have money to spend on me. You've already done much more than you should have." "Foolish child," the elder reprimanded her affectionately. "You saved her grandson. You taught our women new remedies. You work hard every day. You make my grandson smile for the first time in 3 years. You've already paid any debt you think you owe." Those words touched a deep part of Sarah's soul. For the first time in her life, she felt truly valued, not for what she could give or produce, but simply for existing and contributing in the way she could. Michael left immediately for town, carrying detailed instructions and a small fortune in tribal crafts that could be sold to fund the legal procedures. Meanwhile, the entire settlement mobilized in a way that left Sarah deeply moved. The women began to prepare a traditional dress for her to wear at the ceremony. The men organized themselves in shifts to keep watch on the trails leading to the settlement. The children were instructed about what to do if strangers appeared asking questions. Daniel spent that night talking with the elders about the traditional rituals that would accompany the civil marriage. He wanted it to be a complete union, recognized both by the laws of the white man and by the traditions of his people. Sarah, meanwhile, could barely sleep. She lay in the hammock, listening to the night sounds of the desert and trying to process the enormity of what was happening. In less than 24 hours she would be married. Again. The irony didn't go unnoticed. She had fled one marriage only to find herself entering another. But this time it was different. This time it was choice. This time it was love. The next morning, Mr. Thompson arrived at the settlement accompanied by Michael and a civil registry official. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair who had worked with the Navajo community on various legal issues over the years. He knew well the complexities of being Native American in modern America. "Ma'am," he said, greeting Sarah respectfully, "Michael explained your situation to me. I want you to know that everything I can legally do to protect you, I will do." "Thank you, sir," she replied, wearing the traditional outfit the women of the tribe had prepared. It was a beautiful combination of natural fabrics, embroidered with patterns that told ancestral stories. "There's a complication," continued the lawyer. "Your previous marriage. We'll need to allege coercion and nullity. This means you'll have to testify about the abuses you suffered. It could be painful." Sarah took a deep breath. She had expected this moment to come. "I will do whatever is necessary," she said firmly. The civil ceremony was quick and technical, but charged with emotion. Daniel wore traditional clothes of his tribe, with necklaces and paintings that indicated his leadership position. When it came time to exchange vows, they decided to do it in his language. "Ayo ani nishni," said Daniel, looking directly into her eyes. "I love you." "Ayo ani nishni," replied Sarah, the words sounding more natural in her mouth with each repetition. "I love you too." The registry official seemed touched by the sincerity of that moment, even without fully understanding the words. There was something in the way they looked at each other that transcended cultures and languages. After the civil ceremony, the community prepared a traditional celebration. There were dances, chants, a ceremonial fire where Daniel and Sarah walked together, while the elders blessed their union with words as ancient as time itself. Grace approached the couple during the feast, carrying a necklace made with special seeds and stones. "This necklace belonged to my grandmother," she said, placing it around Sarah's neck. "She wore it when she married my grandfather. My mother wore it, I wore it, Emma wore it, now it's yours." Sarah touched the necklace with reverence, understanding the weight of that gesture. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a complete acceptance into the lineage of the women of this family. "Grandmother Grace, I don't know if I deserve." "You deserve," interrupted the elder, "and more importantly, you will honor what it represents." The celebration continued late into the night, but Daniel and Sarah withdrew when the moon was high. For the first time, they would share the same hammock as true husband and wife. The hogan had been specially prepared for that night. Wildflowers perfumed the air. Candles made of beeswax created a soft golden light. Daniel's children were sleeping in relatives' homes, giving the couple privacy. Sarah was nervous, not just about the physical intimacy that was approaching, but for everything it represented. It was the first time she would lie with a man of her own will, out of desire, out of love. Daniel noticed her tension and approached slowly. "We don't have to do anything you don't want," he said softly. "I can sleep in the other hammock if you prefer." "No," she replied quickly. "I want to. It's just that it's different. All of this is very different." He gently pulled her to him, his arms enveloping her in a protection that was both strong and delicate. "We'll go slow," he promised, "at your pace." What happened that night was a revelation for Sarah. She discovered that her sexuality hadn't been destroyed by Richard's abuses, just dormant. In Daniel's careful hands, her body came back to life in a way she didn't know was possible. He touched her as if she were sacred, exploring every inch of skin with a reverence that made her cry with relief. There was no rush, no demand. Just two bodies getting to know each other, two souls connecting in a language older than words. When they finally united completely, it was as if all the broken pieces of Sarah rearranged themselves into something new and whole. She was no longer the woman who had fled through the desert. She was no longer anyone's property. She was simply Sarah, loved and loving, whole on her own terms. Afterwards, lying together in the hammock that swayed gently, she traced the scars on his chest with the tip of her fingers. "Tell me about Emma," she asked softly. Daniel remained silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer, but then he began to speak, his voice low in the darkness. "She was like fire," he said, "bright, strong, impossible to ignore. We married young, had children early. It was our childhood being lived together, you know. We grew up side by side." Sarah listened without jealousy, only with curiosity about the woman who had shaped the man she loved. "Cancer took her slowly," he continued. 3 years watching her waste away, fighting against something we couldn't see or combat. In the end, she made me promise that I would move on, that I wouldn't become a ghost along with her." "And did you become one?" "For a time," he admitted, "until you appeared." Sarah snuggled closer against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady under her ear. "Do you think she would approve of this, us?" Daniel chuckled softly, a rare and precious sound. "Emma would love you," he said with certainty. "She always defended the weakest, always wanted me to use my position to protect those who needed it. You would have been her friend." Those words removed the last vestige of guilt Sarah still carried about loving a man who had loved another woman first. It wasn't a competition, it was continuation. They slept embraced, but their rest was interrupted before dawn by urgent knocks on the door of the hogan. "Daniel!" It was the voice of Thomas, one of the young warriors who kept watch during the night. "There's strange movement on the main trail. Cars, many men." Sarah felt her blood freeze. Not even 24 hours married, and they had already been found. Daniel rose quickly, putting on his clothes and grabbing the machete he always kept nearby. "How many?" he asked. "At least 5 cars. Many men. Armed." Sarah dressed with trembling hands. It was the moment she had feared since she arrived there. Richard had found her trail and he wasn't coming alone. "Sarah," Daniel turned to her, his hands holding her face. "Remember what we talked about? The secret cave behind the waterfall?" She nodded. It was a hideout he had shown her during one of their walks, a natural cave hidden by the curtain of water. "Go there now, take water, food, and stay hidden until I come for you." "I won't leave you to face this alone," she protested. "You won't help me if you're here," he said firmly. "You'll distract me because I'll be worried about protecting you. I need to know you're safe so I can deal with this." Sarah knew he was right, but the idea of hiding while he faced Richard and his thugs made her sick. "What if something happens to you?" "Nothing will happen," he promised, kissing her quickly. "But if it does, You take the marriage documents that are in the wooden box and go straight to Mr. Thompson. He'll know what to do." She wanted to argue more, but the sound of engines approaching cut the conversation short. There was no more time. Sarah left through the back of the Hogan, running through the desert toward the waterfall. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure it could be heard for miles. Every shadow between the rocks seemed to hide a threat. Every sound made her quicken her pace. When she reached the cave, she hid behind the curtain of water and tried to control her breathing. From there she could see the settlement in the distance, but couldn't make out what was happening. In the settlement, Daniel quickly gathered the men of the community. There weren't many, perhaps 15 capable of fighting, but they knew every inch of that territory and had the advantage of defending their families. "What do we know?" he asked Thomas. "They're men from the city, expensive cars, office clothes. But some are definitely private security. I saw weapons." Grace approached, carrying an old but well-maintained shotgun. "Grandmother, you should stay with the children," said Daniel. "Child, I was fighting before you were born," she retorted firmly. "And this woman is part of our family now. No one comes here to threaten our family." The cars stopped at the entrance to the settlement, forming an intimidating barrier. Richard Thornton got out of the main car, and Daniel immediately understood why Sarah had fled. The man emanated a toxic arrogance, a sense of entitlement that extended over everything around him like a poisonous cloud. He was tall, well-dressed, with perfectly arranged grey hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Next to him, 2 expensive-suited lawyers and 4 private security guards who looked capable of breaking people in half without blinking. "Good afternoon," said Richard, with false politeness. "I'm looking for my wife. I have reason to believe she may be here." Daniel stepped forward, naturally assuming the position of spokesperson for the community. "And who would your wife be?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. Richard showed a photo of Sarah, a photo that had clearly been taken without her knowledge because she looked scared and vulnerable. "Sarah Wilson Thornton, my legally married wife, who ran away from home 2 months ago. I have documents that prove our marriage." "And why would she run away?" The question came from Grace, who had strategically positioned herself with her shotgun visible but not pointed. Richard looked at her with barely disguised contempt. "Marital problems," he said dismissively. "Issues that should be resolved within the family." "If they're family issues," said Daniel calmly, "why did you bring a small army?" Richard's mask of politeness slipped for a moment, revealing the anger underneath. "I brought protection because I know you people, savages, might not understand civility." A tense murmur passed through the Navajo men. Calling a native people savages was one of the deepest possible offenses. "Be careful with your words," warned Daniel, his voice dropping an octave. "You're on our land, surrounded by our people. Civility can go both ways." One of the lawyers approached, trying to diffuse the tension. "Gentlemen, we don't need hostility. We have a court order that allows us to search for Mrs. Thornton. If she's here, she must come with us. It's the law." "What law?" asked Grace dryly. "The law that allowed you to steal our lands? The law that killed our ancestors? The law that still today tries to expel us from where we've always lived?" The lawyer looked uncomfortable but insisted. "American law, ma'am. The marriage is legal and registered." "Interesting," said Daniel with a dangerous smile. "Because according to American law, I also have some documents that might interest you." He signaled to Michael, who approached carrying the marriage papers celebrated the day before. "Sarah Wilson no longer exists," announced Daniel, showing the certificate. "Now she is Sarah Begay, my legally married wife as of yesterday afternoon." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard looked at the papers with an expression of disbelief that quickly transformed into fury. "That's impossible," he growled. "She's already my wife. She can't marry again." "She can if the first marriage was annulled due to coercion," said Daniel calmly. "Mr. Thompson, our lawyer, has already filed the papers alleging that the previous marriage was forced and abusive." Richard completely lost his composure. His face turned red with anger, the veins in his neck bulging. "Where is she?" he shouted. "Where is my property?" "Your property?" Daniel's voice became dangerously low. "I just called a person property in front of witnesses. The Navajo men moved closer, forming a threatening semicircle around the invaders. Richard realized he had completely lost control of the situation and resorted to desperation. "She is mine," he insisted, but there was now despair in his voice. "I paid for her. I have rights." "Paid for her," repeated Grace with incredulity. "Are you admitting you bought a person?" One of the security guards whispered something in Richard's ear, probably warning him that he was publicly incriminating himself. "It doesn't matter what you did," said Richard, trying to regain control. "She will come back with me, one way or another." It was then that Daniel lost his patience. In a fluid motion, he drew his machete and pointed it directly at Richard's chest. "Another way, then," he said with deadly calm, "because she's not going anywhere against her will." The guards immediately drew their weapons, but found themselves surrounded by 15 Navajo men, armed with machetes, staffs, and even some old shotguns. The numerical advantage had quickly shifted. "You're making a mistake," said one of the lawyers nervously. "Attacking civilians is a federal crime." "Civilians?" Grace laughed bitterly. "These men came armed to our settlement, threatening our family. Who's committing a crime here?" In the cave, Sarah heard the sound of raised voices echoing through the desert. She couldn't distinguish words, but she recognized Richard's tone, that controlled anger that always preceded explosions. Day of violence. Her first instinct was to run back to stand by Daniel's side, but she forced herself to remain hidden. If she were captured, everything they had done to protect her would have been in vain. Still, every fiber of her being screamed to go help the man who had become her salvation. Back at the settlement, the standoff continued. Richard realized he had severely underestimated the situation. He had arrived expecting to intimidate some ignorant Indians and found himself faced with an organized community, well-informed and willing to fight. "Very well," he finally said. "You win today, but this doesn't end here. I have resources, I have contacts, I have better lawyers than you do. I will destroy this entire settlement if necessary to recover what is mine." "Try," Daniel replied simply, "but now get off our land and don't come back." "Richard?" And his men slowly retreated toward the cars, but the anger in his eyes promised that this was far from over. "Sarah," he shouted before getting into the car, "I know you can hear me. You are mine, and always will be. No matter who you marry, no matter where you hide, you belong to me." The shouts echoed through the desert as the cars departed, leaving only dust and the promise that they would return with more force. Daniel waited until he was sure they had completely left before going to get Sarah from the cave. He found her, huddled behind the waterfall, trembling despite the heat. "It's over," he said, pulling her into his arms. "For now, it's over." "I heard him shouting," she whispered against his chest. "I heard what he said." "Empty words from a desperate man," Daniel replied, but they both knew that wasn't true. Richard wasn't a man who gave up easily, and now he knew exactly where to find her. When they returned to the settlement, they found the entire community gathered around the central fire. There was a gravity in the air that Sarah immediately recognized. "We need to talk," said Grace when she saw them arriving. "All of us." What followed was one of the most difficult conversations Sarah had ever faced. The community was divided between those who wanted to protect her at any cost and those who feared her presence would bring more problems than they could handle. "He won't stop," said Jacob, one of the older men. "Men like that don't stop until they get what they want, and we don't have the resources to fight against him indefinitely." "So you suggest handing our sister over to a man who treats her like an object?" asked Thomas with indignation. "I suggest protecting our children," retorted Jacob. "He threatened to destroy the settlement. Do you think he's bluffing?" Sarah listened to the discussion with her heart breaking. Once again, her presence was causing division and pain for people who didn't deserve to go through this. "Maybe he's right," she finally said, her voice cutting through the discussions. "Maybe I should leave, not to go back to Richard, but far away from here, to where he can't find you through me." "No," said Daniel firmly. "We won't run. We won't hide. We will fight." "Daniel," she took his hands, "you have 3 children to think about. An entire community. I can't ask you to risk everything for me." You're not asking, interrupted Grace. We are offering, because that's what family does. But... No buts, said the elder firmly. You saved our little one. You brought knowledge to our settlement. You made our leader smile again. You are our daughter now, our sister, and no one abandons family. The elder's words were followed by murmurs of agreement from various community members. It wasn't unanimity, but it was a majority. Then we need to prepare, said Daniel, because he will return, and next time he'll bring more people and more problems. Let him come, said Thomas, touching the handle of the machete at his waist. This land has seen many wars. We've survived them all. Sarah looked around the fire, seeing the determined faces of the people who had chosen to protect her, even knowing the risks. She felt an emotion so deep she couldn't name it. It was gratitude, love, responsibility, and terror mixed into something overwhelming. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for giving me a family. You don't need to thank. First, said Grace with a smile, family is family always. But as the words of support and determination echoed around the fire, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the storm that was coming would be bigger than any of them imagined. Richard had shown only a fraction of his power that day. And men, like him, when wounded in their pride and control, were capable of unimaginable destruction. The war had only just begun. The days that followed the confrontation with Richard were tense, like a bowstring about to snap. The Navajo settlement transformed into a silent fortress, with sentinels posted at all access points and a communication system through signals that allowed them to alert about any suspicious movement within minutes. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility crushing her shoulders. Each worried look, each child who could no longer play freely in the desert, each man who slept with a machete beside his hammock, all of this was her fault. At least that's how she felt, even though Daniel and the others tried to convince her. Otherwise, "You're eating yourself up inside," observed Lily one morning, as they helped prepare the week's medicines. The 12-year-old girl had developed a keen perception about the feelings of the adults around her. "I'm worried," admitted Sarah, pounding dried leaves with more force than necessary. "Dad is too, but he becomes different when you're around." "Less heavy." Sarah stopped pounding and looked at her stepdaughter. It was strange to think of this girl as a stepdaughter when she had only known the family for a few months, but the bonds that had formed seemed as solid as if they had existed for years. "Do you miss your mother?" asked Sarah softly. Lily remained quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Every day," she finally answered. "But not in a way that hurts so much anymore. It's different now. Like she's a beautiful song that we remember fondly, you know? Before, when Dad was sad about her, the memory hurt. Now it seems like she's at peace. And so are we." The girl's words touched a deep place in Sarah's heart. It was the first time someone in the family had spoken directly about how her presence had changed the family dynamic, and knowing that this change had been positive brought a relief she hadn't expected to feel. "Lily," she began, but was interrupted by the sound of footsteps running toward the hogan. Jason appeared at the entrance, his eyes wide with excitement and fear. "Sarah, there's a woman at the entrance to the settlement, a city woman, says she needs to talk to you." Sarah's blood froze. Could Richard have sent someone to try to convince her to return? Or worse, was it some kind of trap? "Where's your father?" she asked, already getting up. "Talking to her. He sent me to call you, but said for you not to come alone." Sarah nodded, picking up the small machete she had learned to always carry with her. Lily followed her, despite protests to stay in the hogan. When they reached the entrance to the settlement, Sarah found Daniel talking to a woman of about 40, elegantly, dressed but with an expression of urgency on her face. She was brunette, with curly hair tied in a bun, and there was something familiar in her features that Sarah couldn't identify. "Sarah?" The woman turned when she saw her approaching. "My God, it really is you." "Who are you?" asked Sarah, maintaining a safe distance. "My name is Jennifer Santos. I'm your cousin." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Sarah had had no contact with any family member for years, since her parents sold her to Richard. "I don't have cousins," she said with distrust. Yes, you do. I'm the daughter of your father's brother. We met when we were children, before the family separated because of land disputes. Jennifer took a step forward, hands extended in a gesture of peace. Sarah, I came to warn you. Richard is planning something terrible. Daniel approached Sarah, his protective presence immediately reassuring. How do we know we can trust her? He asked Jennifer directly. Because I work at the law firm that Richard hired to recover Sarah, she replied without hesitation. I've been a lawyer there for 15 years. When I saw her name on the documents, I couldn't believe it. Sarah studied the woman's face, looking for signs of lying or deception. There was something genuine in her expression, a real concern that was difficult to fake. What is he planning? She finally asked. He's obtained a court order to investigate this settlement under suspicion of kidnapping and illegal detention. He's coming back with the FBI, claiming that you're keeping her here against her will. Sarah's stomach sank. It was exactly the kind of legal maneuver Richard would make, using the system against people who had fewer resources to defend themselves. When? Asked Daniel. Tomorrow morning. He's already mobilizing contacts in the FBI, making it seem like this is a human rights case. He'll say she's a civilized woman being kept by savages against her will. The word savages made several Navajo men who had approached growl with anger. There's more, continued Jennifer, visibly uncomfortable. He discovered about your marriage. He's claiming it was forced, that you coerced her into marrying as a way to legitimize the kidnapping. Son of a bitch, muttered Daniel between his teeth. Why are you telling us this? Asked Sarah. If you work for him, why warn us? Jennifer took a deep breath before answering. Because I know what he did to you. I read the medical reports. He presented as evidence of the mental instability that would justify your escape. I saw the photos of the injuries. I read the testimonies of the ranch employees about the screams that came from your room. Her voice became choked. No woman deserves to go through that. Family protects family. Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. For the first time since she had fled, someone from her biological family was on her side. What can we do? Asked Daniel. He's counting on the fact that you don't have legal resources to adequately defend yourselves. But I can help. I can officially represent Sarah, counter his allegations with evidence of the abuses she suffered. Would it be safe for you to do this? Asked Sarah, concerned. He could fire you, ruin your career. Jennifer smiled for the first time since she had arrived. I already submitted my resignation this morning, and I have copies of all the documents that prove what he did to you. He may have money and contacts, but I have proof. Grace, who had silently approached during the conversation, studied Jennifer with her penetrating eyes. Why should we trust you? Asked the elder directly. Because, replied Jennifer, looking directly into the older woman's eyes, I was also forcibly married when I was 17. I know what it's like to be treated as property. I managed to free myself, studied law, so I would never be vulnerable like that again. Now I can use that knowledge to help my cousin. Grace nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with the answer. So what do we do? Asked Daniel. What followed was the longest night Sarah had spent since her arrival at the settlement. Jennifer worked tirelessly preparing the legal defense, while the community organized to receive the FBI visit in the best possible way. They'll look for anything that can be interpreted as primitive or dangerous, explained Jennifer. We want to show an organized, civilized community where Sarah chose to stay of her own free will. It was a race against time. Documents were organized, witnesses prepared, the settlement arranged to make the best possible impression. Sarah rehearsed her testimony several times, reliving painful moments so she could clearly articulate why she had fled and why she had chosen to stay. During the early morning, as Jennifer finalized the legal papers, Sarah found herself alone, with Daniel for the first time since the crisis began. There's something I need to tell you, she said, her voice tense with nervousness. Daniel looked up from the documents he was reviewing. What is it? Sarah took a deep breath. There was no easy way to say it. I'm late. My period is almost 2 weeks late. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel looked at her fixedly, processing the information he had just received. Do you think... I don't know, she said quickly. It could be stress, the change in lifestyle, anything, but it's possible. Daniel approached her, his hands trembling slightly as he touched her face. How do you feel about that possibility? It was a complex question. Sarah had lived her entire life being defined by her supposed infertility. The possibility of being pregnant was both a miracle and a terror. Confused, she admitted, happy, scared, incredulous, all at the same time. And if it's true, if we're expecting a child, then Richard will say the child is his, she responded, voice breaking. He'll use it as another way to control me. Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. The child would be ours, he said firmly. No matter what anyone says, ours. Daniel, you don't understand. If I'm pregnant, it changes everything. He can claim paternal rights. He can try, interrupted Daniel, but he won't succeed. We won't let him. Sarah wanted to believe him, but she knew how the world worked for men like Richard. Money and power had a way of distorting even the most obvious truths. We need to know for sure, she said finally. Tomorrow, after we resolve this issue with the police, we'll go to town for a test, he promised. But they both knew that if she was pregnant, the already complicated situation would become exponentially more dangerous. Dawn came too soon. At 8 in the morning, a caravan of official cars approached the settlement. 3 FBI vehicles, 2 cars from the public prosecutor's office, and Richard's car closing the procession. Jennifer had strategically positioned herself at the entrance to the settlement, wearing her most professional suit and carrying a folder full of documents. Beside her, Daniel wore traditional clothes but also a dress shirt underneath, a combination that showed respect for both his culture and the arriving authorities. Sarah was in the center of the settlement, surrounded by the women of the community who visibly supported her. It had been a strategic choice to show that she was not isolated or imprisoned, but integrated into a community that welcomed her. The federal agent leading the operation was a middle-aged man named Agent Carson, who seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the situation. It was obvious he had been pressured to conduct this investigation, but wasn't convinced of its necessity. Good morning, he greeted respectfully. I'm Federal Agent Carson. We're here to investigate a complaint of illegal detention and coercion. Good. Morning, sir, replied Daniel calmly. I'm Daniel Begay, leader of this community. This is our lawyer, Jennifer Santos. Richard got out of the car with a barely disguised expression of triumph. He was clearly expecting to find Sarah in deplorable conditions, perhaps tied up or obviously coerced. Instead, she was clean, well-dressed, surrounded by people who treated her with affection and respect. Where's my wife? He demanded. Ex-wife, Jennifer immediately corrected, showing the annulment documents. The marriage was legally annulled due to coercion, and Mrs. Begay is now legally married to Mr. Daniel Begay. Mrs. Begay? Richard laughed with contempt. She's not even Indian. This is a complete farce. According to American law, intervened Agent Carson, any person can marry a member of a native community and adopt the family name. There's no illegality in that. Richard realized his first line of attack had failed and changed strategy. She's being kept here against her will, he insisted. She was coerced into marrying to legitimize the kidnapping. Let's hear from the lady herself, said Agent Carson, approaching Sarah. Mrs. Begay, I'm here to ensure your rights. If you're being held against your will, you can speak freely. Sarah took a deep breath and looked directly into the agent's eyes. Sir, I'm here by my own choice. I fled from an abusive marriage where I was treated as property. This community took me in, protected me, and gave me the chance to rebuild my life. She's lying, exploded Richard. She was manipulated by these savages. Watch your words, Agent Carson warned coldly. You're talking about American citizens. Jennifer approached, opening her folder. Sir, I'd like to present evidence of the abuses my client suffered in her previous marriage. We have medical reports, photographs of the injuries, and witness testimonies. As Jennifer presented the evidence, Sarah observed Richard's face becoming increasingly red with anger. He was losing control of the narrative, and they both knew. So this is all fabricated, he shouted. She fell and hurt herself. She had psychological problems. I took care of her. Took care of her? Agent Carson leafed through the photographs of Sarah's injuries, his expression growing increasingly somber. These lesions are consistent with systematic domestic violence. She's unstable. She's infertile. She's not good for anything except causing problems. The words came out of Richard's mouth before he realized the mistake he was making. He had just publicly admitted that he considered his ex-wife worthless due to her medical condition. "Interesting perspective on marriage," commented Agent Carson dryly. "From what I see here, ma'am, you have more than enough reasons to have fled and sought protection." Richard realized he had completely lost control of the situation and resorted to desperation. "She might be pregnant," he shouted. "If she is, the child is mine. I have rights over my child." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah felt the world spin around her. How could he know? How was it possible that he knew something she had barely admitted to herself? Daniel instinctively approached her, a protective hand on her back. "How do you know that?" asked Agent Carson, clearly interested in the answer. Richard realized too late that he had revealed information he shouldn't have. He stammered for a few seconds before answering. I'm just saying it's a possibility. If she is, the child would be mine." "Actually," Jennifer calmly intervened, "any child conceived after the annulment of the previous marriage would be legally the child of Mrs. Begay's current husband." "This is ridiculous. She can't even get pregnant. She's sterile." Again, Richard incriminated himself with his own words, showing the contempt he felt for Sarah due to her medical condition. Agent Carson closed the folder with the evidence and turned to his subordinates. "I see no evidence of illegal detention or coercion. The lady is clearly here of her own free will, integrated into a community that respects and protects her. The case is closed." "This can't be happening." Richard was completely losing his composure. "She is my property. I paid for her." "Mr. Thornton," said Agent Carson with a voice of steel, "you just publicly admitted that you consider a person as property that can be bought. That's a federal crime. You're being arrested for human trafficking." What happened next was chaos. Richard tried to run, but was quickly detained by the federal agents. He shouted obscenities and threats as he was handcuffed, promising to destroy the settlement and everyone who lived in it. Sarah watched it all as if in a dream. After months of terror, the man who had been her nightmare was being taken away in handcuffs, but instead of relief, she felt only a strange emptiness. "It's over," Daniel said softly in her ear. "It's really over." But Sarah wasn't sure about that. Men like Richard had resources, lawyers, contacts. Even imprisoned, he could still cause problems. Jennifer approached the couple after the authorities left. "He'll be prosecuted," she said. "Human trafficking, domestic violence, threats. With the evidence we have, he'll be in prison for a long time." "And if he manages to get out," asked Sarah, "then we'll be ready. But for now, you're safe." In the days that followed, the settlement slowly returned to normal. The sentinels were withdrawn. The children returned to playing freely in the desert. The tension that had dominated the community finally began to dissipate. Sarah and Daniel made the trip to town to confirm what they both already suspected. The pregnancy test was positive. She was approximately 6 weeks pregnant. The news was received with celebration by the community. Grace prepared special teas to help with the morning sickness that had begun. The women of the tribe shared stories and advice about pregnancy and childbirth. Daniel's children were ecstatic at the prospect of having a brother or sister. But for Sarah, the pregnancy was an emotional roller coaster. On one hand, she was accomplishing something she had always been told was impossible. On the other, there was the constant fear that something would go wrong, that her body would betray her as it always had. "You're worried," observed Daniel one night, as she tossed and turned in the hammock, unable to sleep. "What if I lose the baby?" she whispered. "What if my body really can't do this?" Daniel pulled her closer, his large, warm hands resting gently on her still flat belly. "Then we'll deal with it together," he said simply. "But for now, our child is growing strong and healthy inside you. Can you feel that?" Sarah closed her eyes and tried to connect with the life growing inside her. It was hard to believe that after years of being defined by absence, she now carried the most important presence in her life. I'm afraid of not knowing how to be a mother, she admitted. You're already a mother to my children, replied Daniel. Lily adores you. Jason follows you everywhere, even Michael, who barely talks to adults, converses with you about medicinal plants for hours. It was true. Somehow, without realizing it, she had become an integral part of that family. She hadn't replaced Emma. That wasn't the goal. She had created her own space, her own way of loving and being loved. Daniel, she said softly, thank you for giving me a family. Thank you for giving a family back to me, he replied, kissing her neck. The pregnancy progressed smoothly in the first few weeks. Sarah had intense morning sickness, but Grace prepared teas that helped. She continued working with medicinal plants, adjusting her activities as her body changed. It was during the 3rd month of pregnancy that the next crisis arose, this time coming from a completely unexpected direction. Sam, a young warrior from a neighboring settlement, arrived one morning carrying disturbing news. There were rumors that businessmen were mobilizing to buy lands around all the indigenous communities in the region, claiming that the presence of external elements, specifically white women married to indigenous leaders, invalidated traditional, territorial rights. It's a coordinated campaign, Sam explained to the settlement council. They're using your marriage as a precedent to question the legitimacy of all the demarcations in the region. Sarah felt her stomach sink. Once again, her presence was causing problems that extended far beyond her personal situation. How many communities are being threatened? Asked Daniel. All in the Monument Valley region, more than 500 families. The weight of this information fell on Sarah like a stone. 500 families could lose their lands because of her choice to marry Daniel and integrate into the community. There has to be another way, she said, standing up abruptly. I can't be responsible for 500 families losing their homes. You are not responsible, Grace said firmly. The greedy men who want to steal our lands are responsible. They're just using you as an excuse. But still. Nothing, interrupted Daniel. We'll fight. We'll organize with the other communities. We'll seek legal support. We'll do whatever is necessary. And if it's not enough? The question hung in the air without an answer. Everyone knew that land struggles in America were complicated, lengthy, and frequently ended badly for indigenous peoples. It was Jennifer, who had permanently moved to the region to continue representing Sarah and helping other women in similar situations, who brought an unexpected solution. There's a federal law that specifically protects interracial and intercultural marriages, she said in an expanded council meeting that included representatives from various settlements. If we can prove that this campaign is motivated by racial and cultural prejudice, we can not only defend you, but also sue those responsible for discrimination. How do we prove that? Asked one of the leaders from another settlement. By documenting everything, recording conversations, collecting evidence that the motivation is prejudiced, and she hesitated, using the fact that Sarah is pregnant to our advantage. How so? Asked Daniel, immediately defensive. Her child will be biologically mixed but culturally Navajo. It will be a powerful symbol of the legitimacy of intercultural marriages and the right of mixed children to fully belong to the communities where they are raised. The idea of using her unborn child as a political symbol made Sarah feel sick, but she understood the logic. It's risky, she said. If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong, promised Daniel. We'll protect you and our child, no matter what happens. The legal campaign that followed was intense and exhaustive. Jennifer worked with lawyers specialized in indigenous rights, activists, international human rights organizations. Sarah's story, a woman who fled an abusive marriage and found love and family in an indigenous community, became a symbol of resistance and renewal. During this period, her pregnancy continued progressing. In the 4th month, they were finally able to hear the baby's heart beating strong and regular. Sarah cried with relief and joy when the sound echoed through the small clinic in the nearest town. It's real, she whispered, touching her belly that was finally beginning to show. It's really happening. It was always real, replied Daniel, his large hands covering hers over her belly. Our child was always real. The legal campaign was gaining strength. National and international journalists began to cover the story. Documentaries were made. Public pressure grew on the businessmen who were trying to use Sarah's marriage as a pretext to question indigenous territorial rights. But with visibility also came danger. They began to receive anonymous threats. Strange cars were seen circulating in the region. There were attempts to invade the lands that were repelled by the young warriors of the various settlements that had united in defense. It was during the 5th month of pregnancy that the incident occurred that almost changed everything. Sarah was alone in the desert, collecting medicinal plants in an area she knew well when she was surrounded by 3 masked men. They weren't professionals. It was obvious they were local thugs hired to intimidate. "You will leave here voluntarily or we'll make you leave," said one of them, wielding a machete. Sarah instinctively placed her hands over her belly, protecting the baby. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied, trying to keep her voice firm despite the fear. "Then you'll regret it." The man approached, the machete raised, but before he could make any movement, an arrow flew by and embedded itself in the tree a few inches from his head. Michael emerged from the desert like a ghost, bow in hand, 3 more arrows already. Prepared. "Touch her and you die," said the teenager, with a deadly calm that didn't match his 15 years. The men hesitated. It was obvious they hadn't expected such quick and efficient resistance. "He's just a kid," said one of them, but his voice carried uncertainty. "A kid who's never missed a shot," replied Michael, aiming directly at the leader's chest. The sound of more people approaching through the desert made the men decide the mission wasn't worth the risk. They fled running, leaving only empty threats behind. "Are you hurt?" Michael approached Sarah, still keeping the bow ready. "No, I'm fine. Thank you." Sarah was still trembling with adrenaline. "How did you know I was in danger?" "I felt it," he said simply. "My mother always said that the desert speaks to those who know how to listen." When Daniel learned of the incident, his reaction was explosive. He immediately organized a search for the aggressors and called an emergency meeting with all the leaders of the region. "Enough," he said to the expanded council. "We will no longer be defensive. It's time to counterattack." What followed was a coordinated campaign that used all available tools: legal, political, social, and media. The communities united as never before, presenting a solid front against the interests trying to tear apart their rights. Sarah, now visibly pregnant, became a central figure in the struggle. Her personal story touched hearts around the world, and international support grew exponentially. "You've become more powerful than any of us imagined," observed Grace one afternoon, as Sarah prepared teas for a delegation of international journalists who had arrived to document the struggle. "I don't feel powerful," admitted Sarah. "I feel like a normal person trying to protect her family." "That's exactly what makes you powerful," replied the elder with a smile. "Normal people protecting their families are the most powerful force that exists." In the 6th month of pregnancy came the decisive victory. The Supreme Court not only rejected all challenges to the territorial rights of the communities, but also established a legal precedent strengthening the protection of intercultural marriages and the rights of mixed children. Richard, meanwhile, had been sentenced to 15 years in prison for human trafficking, domestic violence, and a series of other crimes that came to light during the investigation. His business empire had crumbled, and he no longer represented a threat to anyone. "It's really over now," said Daniel to Sarah that night, as they felt the baby actively kicking in her belly. "Yes," she agreed, finally believing her own words. "It's over." But it was also beginning. The life growing inside her represented not only their future as a family, but also a new chapter in the history of resistance and renewal of a people who had survived centuries of attempts at destruction. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and Sarah smiled. Her child would be raised knowing 2 cultures, 2 worlds, but fully belonging to both. It would be free in a way she never had been, loved in a way she had only discovered as an adult. "What do you want to name it?" asked Daniel, feeling the baby's movements through the skin of Sarah's belly. "If it's a boy, David, it means beloved because he is so loved. And if it's a girl? Nina, star, Because she'll be our light." Daniel kissed her belly softly. "David or Nina," he murmured, "you will grow up knowing you are loved, that you are free, that you can be anything you want to be." It was a big promise, but looking around the settlement that had become her home, surrounded by people who had chosen to fight for her family, Sarah believed it was a promise they could fulfill. The storm had passed. What remained now was the light that came after, golden, warm, full of infinite possibilities. The final months of Sarah's pregnancy passed in a peace that she had learned not to take for granted. Her belly grew round and firm. The baby moved. Constantly, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely in control of her own body. It was an intoxicating and frightening sensation at the same time. Summer arrived with full force in the desert, bringing torrential rains that transformed the dry landscape into a green and exuberant paradise. Sarah spent the afternoons on the porch of the hogan, watching the children of the settlement play in the rain while feeling her child dance in her belly. "This one's going to be a dancer," joked Lily one of those afternoons, placing her hand on her stepmother's belly to feel the movements. "Never stay still for even a minute." "How do you know it's a boy?" asked Sarah, stroking the girl's hair who had become her daughter in heart. "Just know. Mom always said women know these things." Lily smiled, an expression that mixed longing and joy. "She would have loved you, you know, and would have gone crazy over this baby." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears, something that happened with frightening frequency in recent months. Pregnancy had made her emotions more intense, closer to the surface. "You think she wouldn't mind? That your father fell in love again?" Lily looked at her with the seriousness that only children can have when talking about important matters. "Mom taught us that love doesn't diminish when it's shared. It only grows. Dad doesn't love you less because he loved her first. And she doesn't become less important because he loves you now." The simple wisdom of those words touched something deep in Sarah's soul. For months, she had carried a residual guilt about occupying Emma's space in Daniel's and the children's lives. But Lily was right. There was no substitution, only expansion. "Thanks. You," she whispered, pulling the girl into a hug, "for letting me be part of your family." "You've always been part of our family," Lily replied naturally. "Since the day you saved Jason. It just took a while for everyone to realize it." Daniel arrived at that moment, returning from a meeting with leaders of neighboring settlements. In recent months, he had become a central figure in regional political articulation, and Sarah knew that part of this was due to the visibility her story had brought to indigenous issues. "How were the conversations?" she asked, rising with some difficulty. The 8-month belly didn't make movements easy. "Productive," he replied, approaching to kiss her and place his hands on her belly. "We got approval for the Indigenous Health Center we wanted to build, and you have an important part in this." "Me?" "They want you to coordinate the traditional medicine part. Your knowledge of medicinal plants, combined with your experience integrating different cultures, makes you the perfect person." The proposal was tempting and frightening at the same time. It would mean responsibility, visibility, the chance to really make a difference in many people's lives. But it would also mean exposing herself, leaving the relative safety she had found in the settlement. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. There's no rush. First, we'll take care of this little warrior," he said, feeling a particularly strong kick. "Or little warrior woman," corrected Lily with a smile. "I thought you were sure it was a boy," teased Daniel. "Changed my mind. Now I think it's a girl, a strong girl like Sarah." That night, while Daniel slept deeply beside her, Sarah stayed awake feeling the baby's movements and thinking about the future. In a few months, she would be a mother. She would have a human being, completely dependent on her, trusting that she would know what to do. It was an overwhelming responsibility for someone who had spent years believing herself inadequate, incomplete, worthless. But at the same time, she felt a strength growing inside her, not just the baby, but a new confidence, a certainty that she could be the mother her child deserved. "Are you okay?" Daniel's sleepy voice brought her back to the present. "Just thinking," she replied, turning to look at him in the darkness. "About what?" About how everything has changed. A year ago, I was a broken woman fleeing through the desert. Now I'm a wife, a mother, and they want me to coordinate a health center. Daniel pulled her closer, their bodies naturally adjusting to the volume of her belly. You were never broken, he said softly. You were hurt, yes, but wounds heal, and when they heal, they leave the person stronger. Daniel? I love you. In a way I didn't know it was possible to love someone. He kissed. Her forehead a tender gesture that had become a ritual between them. Ayo ani nishni, he whispered. Forever. Labor began on a September morning, when the desert was at the height of its post-rain beauty. Sarah woke up with mild contractions that she initially confused with the baby's movements. It was only when she got up to prepare breakfast and felt a more intense pain that she realized what was happening. Daniel, she called, her voice carrying excitement and nervousness. I think it's time. His reaction was immediate. In seconds, he was up, alert, mentally going through the list of preparations they had made. Are you sure? A new contraction, stronger than the previous one, answered the question. I'm sure, she gasped. What followed was a carefully choreographed ballet. Grace was called. She would be the midwife, as she had been for 3 generations of women in the family. Jennifer was notified to come with the doctor on duty from town in case of complications. The women of the settlement mobilized to prepare everything that would be needed. Sarah had chosen to have the birth in the settlement, surrounded by the people she loved, following traditions that were now hers too. It was a decision that had caused some discussions. Daniel wanted the safety of a hospital. Jennifer shared the legal concerns. But Grace had been firm. Navajo women had given birth at home, surrounded by community for thousands of years. If there's any problem, we'll go straight to the hospital, had been the final agreement. But as the contractions intensified, Sarah felt strangely calm. Her body knew what to do, and she trusted the women around her who had gone through this experience countless times. Breathe deeply, instructed Grace, her experienced hands massaging Sarah's back. Let the body work, it knows what to do. Lily and some of the other older girls helped preparing teas, organizing clean cloths, keeping hot water ready. It was an ancient ritual, a moment when the entire female community united to bring a new life into the world. Daniel stayed outside the hogan with the other men, nervous like every first-time father, even though he had gone through this 3 times before with Emma. Jason and Michael alternated between staying with their father and running inside to get news. Is it taking too long? Asked Jason for the 10th time. Babies arrive in their own time, patiently replied one of the elders. Your father waited 2 days when you were born. Inside the hogan, Sarah was entering the most intense phase of labor. The contractions came in waves increasingly closer and intense, but she discovered she could surf them instead of fighting against them. You're doing very well, encouraged Grace. The baby is in a good position. It won't be long now. Can I call Daniel? Gasped Sarah between contractions. In the Navajo tradition, men didn't directly participate in childbirth, but Grace understood that Sarah came from a different culture and needed her husband's support. Of course, child, call him. When Daniel entered the hogan and saw Sarah sweaty, panting but radiant with determination, he felt his heart almost explode with love and admiration. How can I help? He asked, kneeling beside the hammock where she was. Just stay with me, she asked, grabbing his hand during a particularly strong contraction. Just stay here. The next 2 hours were a journey through pain, effort, and a primitive strength that Sarah didn't know she possessed. Each contraction brought her closer to the moment when she would finally meet the baby she had carried for 9 months. The head is crowning, announced Grace with excitement. A few more contractions. And your child will be here. Child? Gasped Sarah. Daughter, corrected Grace with a smile. A beautiful, strong girl. With one last monumental effort, Nina Begay came into the world, screaming loud enough to wake the entire desert. She was small but perfect, with a thick black mane and eyes that, even closed, promised to be large and expressive like her father's. She's perfect, whispered Grace, placing the baby on Sarah's chest. Completely perfect. Sarah looked at her little daughter, and felt as if her heart exploded into 1,000 pieces, only to recompose itself in a completely new format. This tiny creature was hers, truly hers, and no one could ever take that away from her. "Hi, Nina," she whispered, gently touching the baby's face. "I'm your mom." Daniel was crying unashamedly, alternating between looking at his daughter and his wife with an expression of pure wonder. "She's beautiful," he finally managed to say. "Just like you." "She has your eyes," replied Sarah, noticing the almond shape of the baby's eyelids. "And your stubborn nose," he teased, making her laugh even in post-childbirth exhaustion. Grace finished all the traditional procedures, cut the umbilical cord, cleaned and wrapped the baby in a blanket specially made for that moment. Nina nursed for the first time with a determination that made everyone laugh. "This girl knows what she wants," observed the elder. "She'll be trouble." "Good," said Sarah, stroking her daughter's little head. "Strong women are trouble anyway." Outside, the sound of the baby's first cry was received with celebration. Fireworks were set off, drums began to play, voices rose in songs of blessing and gratitude. Jason was the first to enter to meet his little sister, followed by Lily, and finally Michael, who tried to disguise the emotion but couldn't stop smiling. "She's so small," whispered Jason, gently touching the baby's hand. "You were this small too when you were born," said Daniel, pulling his son closer. "Can I hold her?" asked Lily. Sarah carefully passed the baby to her older daughter, who received her with reverence. "Hi, Nina," whispered Lily. "I'm your sister Lily. I'll teach you everything about being a Navajo girl." The scene, Lily holding the baby, Jason and Michael approaching curiously, Daniel with his arm around Sarah, was the perfect image of a family. Not a traditional family, perhaps, but a real family united by love and choice. "Our family is complete," Daniel said softly in Sarah's ear. "It was complete since the day you took me in," she replied. "Nina is just the cherry on top." The days that followed the birth were a whirlwind of visits, celebrations, and adjustments to the new family dynamic. Nina proved to be a relatively easy baby. She slept well, nursed vigorously, and only cried when she really needed something. Sarah discovered that motherhood, far from being the boogeyman she had feared, came naturally to her. Her instincts seemed to know exactly what the baby needed, and she found a new confidence in her ability to care for and protect. "You were born to be a mother," observed Jennifer during one of her visits, watching Sarah nurse Nina with complete serenity. "Funny how life works," replied Sarah. "I spent years believing I was incomplete because I couldn't have children. And now I've discovered it wasn't my body that was wrong. It was my situation." "Your body always knew what to do," said Grace, who had become a constant presence in the first days post-childbirth. "It just needed love and security to function properly." It was a profound truth. In an environment of stress, violence, and coercion, Sarah's body had closed itself, protecting itself, but surrounded by love, support, and security, it had naturally flourished. When Nina completed 1 month, it was time to make a decision about the health center proposal. Sarah had used that time to think, observe, feel, if she was ready for that challenge. "I accept," she said during the meeting with the settlement leaders, "but with conditions." "Which ones?" asked one of the elders. "I want it to be a truly integrative center, traditional medicine working side by side with modern medicine, healers recognized as health professionals, medicinal plants studied and scientifically validated without losing their cultural context." "Is that possible?" asked another leader. "With the right support, yes," replied Jennifer, who had specialized in legislation on traditional medicine. "There are legal precedents, and with the visibility that Sarah's story has brought, we can get international funding." The health center project became a good obsession for Sarah. She spent hours planning, studying, consulting with healers from the various settlements. Nina always with her, tied to her chest in a traditional sling, absorbing everything around her with large, curious eyes. "She'll grow up thinking that working is the most natural thing in the world," joked Daniel one night, watching Sarah nurse the baby while reviewing plants for medicinal formulations. "She'll grow up seeing that women can do anything," corrected Sarah, including changing the world one plant at a time. Construction of the center began when Nina was 3 months old. It was an ambitious project, modern facilities integrated with traditional spaces for ceremonies and ancestral practices. Medicinal gardens surrounded the main building. State-of-the-art laboratories were next to rooms where elders would prepare remedies as their grandmothers had done for centuries. Sarah became the public face of the project, giving interviews, participating in conferences, writing articles about integrative medicine. It was an impressive transformation, from the woman who had fled through the desert to the internationally recognized specialist. "Sometimes I can't believe it's me doing all this," she confessed to Daniel one night, after a video conference with researchers from an American university. "I always knew you were capable," he replied, cradling Nina, who had woken during the conversation. "How could you know if I didn't know myself?" "Because I saw who you really were underneath all the pain. I saw the strength, the intelligence, the determination. I was just waiting for you to see it too." Nina turned 6 months old on the day of the health center's inauguration. The ceremony was a celebration of cultures, with representatives from dozens of tribes, government authorities, international researchers, and journalists from various parts of the world. Sarah gave a speech carrying her daughter in her arms, talking about the importance of integrating different forms of knowledge, about respecting ancestral traditions while embracing beneficial innovations. "This center represents more than medicine," she said to the audience. "It represents the possibility of different worlds working together, respecting differences but finding common ground. It represents the idea that no one needs to give up who they are to be part of something bigger." The phrase went viral on social media, cited in academic articles, used as inspiration by other cultural integration projects around the world. But for Sarah, the most important moment of the day was when Grace, now 83 years old, cut the inaugural ribbon of the center using scissors made with traditional Navajo metal. "This woman," said the elder, referring to Sarah but looking at Nina, "brought changes that will benefit our children for the next 100 years. That night, after all the visitors had left and the settlement returned to normal, Sarah found herself alone with Daniel and Nina on the porch of their hogan watching the stars. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am complete," she replied, and for the first time in her life the word had full meaning. "I have a family that loves me, work that fulfills me, a healthy daughter, and a future we've built together." "And I have you," said Daniel, kissing her softly. "The bravest woman I've ever known." "The most loved woman," she corrected, "because it was your love that gave me courage." Nina chose that moment to wake up and look at her parents with those large, curious eyes that already promised a strong personality. "Hi, my love," whispered Sarah to her daughter. "Did you wake up to see the stars with Mommy?" "She'll grow up knowing she can reach any of them," said Daniel, gently touching the baby's face. "She'll grow up knowing she's free," added Sarah. "Free to choose who she wants to be, where she wants to live, how she wants to love." "She'll grow up knowing her two cultures," continued Daniel, "but fully belonging to both." It was a big promise, but looking around, at the settlement that had become her home, at the health center that represented the future, at the family they had built together, Sarah believed it was a promise they could fulfill. 2 years later, when Nina was taking her first steps in the medicinal garden of the health center, chasing butterflies, while Sarah collected plants for new research, news arrived that would definitively close the cycle of the past. Richard had died in prison. Heart attack, according to official reports. Alone, abandoned even by the lawyers who had stopped visiting him when the money ran out. Sarah received the news in silence, processing what she felt. She had expected relief, perhaps joy at justice finally being done. Instead, she felt only emptiness, pity perhaps for a man who had chosen cruelty over love, possession over partnership. "How are you?" asked Daniel when she told him the news. "Free," she replied, and realized it was true. Completely free. That night, she burned the last documents she still kept from her previous life, certificates, contracts, papers that had once defined her existence. She watched the ashes scatter in the wind and felt as if she were finally, definitively, being born again. "No regrets?" I asked. Daniel watching the fire consume the last vestiges of her past. "None," she replied firmly. "Everything I went through brought me here, brought me to you, to our family, to this work I love. If I could go back and change anything, I might never have found you. And I would never have found the woman who taught me to love again," he said, pulling her into his arms. Nina, now a curious and talkative 2-year-old child, interrupted the romantic moment by running to them with a book in her hands. "Story," she demanded as she did every night. "What story do you want tonight, my love?" asked Sarah, sitting in the hammock with her daughter in her lap. "Mommy's story," said Nina, as always. It was her favorite request, the story of how Mommy had come to them. Sarah had created an adapted version for children, focusing on the journey, the discovery of love, the building of the family. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a woman who was lost in the desert." Daniel settled beside them, listening for the 100th time to the story he knew by heart, but never tired of hearing. Lily, Jason, and Michael approached too, attracted by Sarah's voice telling stories. And when she least expected it, she found a family that taught her that home isn't a place. It's where the people we love are. "And they lived happily ever after?" asked Nina, as she always did. "They lived happily," Sarah corrected gently. "Not ever after, because nothing lasts forever, but happy each day, building love each day, choosing family each day." "That's better than forever," declared Nina with the simple wisdom of children. "Much better," agreed Sarah, kissing the top of her daughter's head. Later, after the children had gone to sleep, Sarah and Daniel stayed on the porch watching the stars as they had done on so many nights since they met. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her contemplative silence. "About how strange life is," she said. "When I fled through the desert, I thought I was running toward death. I was running toward life." "You were running toward me," he said with that smile that still made her heart race. "I was running toward us," she corrected. "Toward this family, this love, this life we've built together." "Ayo ani nisni," he said softly. "Ayo ani nisni," she repeated, the words now as natural as breathing. "I love you." It was a simple statement, but one that contained universes. It contained the journey of a woman who had learned to love herself through the love of others. It contained the story of a man who had rediscovered that the heart can love more than once, in different but equally true ways. It contained the saga of a family created not by blood, but by choice, by care, by the determination to create something beautiful where before there was only pain. And it contained the promise that, no matter what storms came, and they always would, they would face them together, as they had done since that first day when he found her dying in the desert and chose to save her. Love had won. Not easily, not without scars, not without a price. But it had won, as it always does when it is true, when it is built on the foundation of respect, partnership, the daily choice to place the good of the other above one's own. And as the stars shone over the desert, Sarah knew that, regardless of what the future brought, she would never be lost again. Because she had found more than a place to call home. She had found people to call family. And that, she discovered, made all the difference in the world. The story that had begun with a desperate escape through the desert ended with a woman secure in herself, loved and loving, mother and wife, respected professional and pillar of the community. It was a complete transformation, but one that had happened step by step, choice by choice, day after day. And the next morning, when Nina would wake up asking for Mommy's story once more, Sarah would have one more chapter to add. Because the story hadn't ended. It had just begun a new volume, full of infinite possibilities and the love that makes them all real.